Hello, everyone. My name is Leslie Elsasser, and I'm the Curator of Education at the USF Contemporary Art Museum, or better known as CAM. I want to thank you so much for joining the MFA panel tonight and helping us celebrate these 13 accomplished and incredibly talented artists. As everyone has experienced, this past year has been especially challenging. But for these artists enrolled in an intensive 3-year MFA program to have accomplished so much during this final year, given all the limitations of COVID, is absolutely extraordinary. These 13 artists worked tirelessly during the entire time, not only to create the artwork in their exhibition Out of Pasture, now showing at CAM, but they also work closely with the various teams at the museum to present proposals, negotiate logistics, install their artwork, produce a catalog, and participate in events such as the panel tonight. All of these tasks are challenging in the best of times, but during a global pandemic, it is nothing short of absolute heroicism. We honor and applaud you and thank you. So if you're interested, I will tell you there is a virtual guided tour of the artwork and the exhibition Out to Pasture. It's available online at www.ira.usf.edu. You'll also find printable versions to the gorgeous catalog here and to the brochure. We invite you to have a look, and we promise you, you won't be disappointed. Before I introduce tonight's moderator, I'd like to thank and recognize everybody at CAM who worked diligently to make this panel possible and are behind the scenes tonight. So I'd like to extend a thank you to Noel Smith, the Deputy Director of CAM and Curator of Caribbean and Latin American Art, to Mark Fredericks, IRA's Communications Specialist, to Don Fuller, our Curator of New Media, and so much more. To Dave Waterman, the Head of Security, voiceover expert, and the person you'll see during the Q&A session. To Marty De La Cruz, CAM's media assistant, and she is our promotions expert. And I would like to recognize CAM Club. CAM Club is our student organization, and they work out of the museum, and they also typically sponsor the MFA panel. But this year, due to the virtual aspect, they are also behind the scenes working very closely with the CAM crew. I would like to acknowledge the officers, and that's Lizette Melendez, Eric Kastelik, Matthew Elzalde, and Alexa Melsetic. They are just fabulous young students doing great things with a brilliant future. So everybody at home, please offer a virtual round of applause for tonight's incredible artists, the CAM crew behind the scenes, and the CAM Club officers. In tonight's program, we're going to hear from the 13 graduating MFA artists who will discuss their ideas, their work, and process with the moderator, Amanda Poss. At the end of the conversation, we will take audience questions. If you have any questions at any point during the conversations, please write your questions in the Q&A chat on the webinar, or on Facebook Live, or on Instagram Live. We'll do our best to respond to as many questions as we can. Lastly, in the true spirit of intercollegiate collaboration, I would like to introduce the moderator for tonight's conversation, Amanda Poss. I not only have the honor of calling Amanda a friend, but she is a true tour de force in the Tampa art scene. Amanda received her MA in art history from the University of South Florida in 2015, specializing in both modern and contemporary art. And she received a BA from the University of St. Francis, Fort Wayne, Indiana in 2011. Poss currently is the gallery director for Hillsborough Community College, where she directs and implements programming and exhibitions across multiple HCC campuses. In her role as gallery director, she also oversees the college's public art program and growing permanent art collection. Poss additionally teaches as an adjunct professor at HCC and serves as a board member for Tempest Projects in Tampa, Florida. She wears a lot of hats. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Amanda Potts.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for that warm and very generous welcome. And thank you also to Cam Club for inviting me to be a part of tonight's event. I'm so delighted to be the moderator for this year's MFA Thesis show hosted at the USF Contemporary Art Museum. As you heard, I'm an alumna of the program myself on the art history side of things. And so it's really especially rewarding to come back and see the work of new generations of graduate students. As this year's class demonstrates, and as you heard from Leslie, this is a truly incredible program that really encourages students to excel in terms of conceptual strategies, innovative use of materials, and technical expertise, all of which is on display in this year's show. And they did all this even in the middle of really significant challenges, like completing their whole third year in the midst of a pandemic. So I just want to echo Leslie's earlier comments and extend my sincere congratulations to all 13 of our artists for their extraordinary accomplishments. Tonight's panel is going to be organized around 4 categories that help to illuminate conceptual and thematic overlap between our 13 artists, drawing on certain similarities while at the same time really illuminating the unique differences between each one of them. This structure owes a debt of gratitude to SK West, another distinguished alumna of the MA Art History program, who wrote the essays for the catalog produced to accompany the exhibition that you saw Leslie hold up just a moment ago. If you haven't had a chance to pick up a copy yet, I highly recommend making an appointment to come see the exhibition in person, get a copy of the catalog while you're there. And as you heard, you can also access all of these things online through USF's CAM website. So now, at this time, I would like to invite our first group of artists organized around the theme of nostalgia and now to turn on their cameras while I introduce them while reading their bios. Mae Carro is a visual artist originally from the Pennsylvania and Delaware area, whose multidisciplinary practice moves between contemporary craft, sculpture, video, and installation. Carrow earned her BFA, magna cum laude, from Millersville University of Pennsylvania in 2017, and has exhibited work both regionally and internationally. JD Hardy is a video artist whose looped videos offer seemingly stable frames that are fragmented, mimicking the skew of dissociation that occurs when our assumed reality suffers frequent fissures. Hardy received her BFA from the University of Nebraska at Omaha. She co-founded Benson First Friday in Omaha, and in 2017, she was a fellow at the Union for Contemporary Arts, an arts organization driven by principles of cultural equity. Our third artist, Nadja Ivanova, is an interdisciplinary multimedia installation artist whose work examines the ideologies of power structures, the conflicts between capitalism and socialism, and the effects these have on national identity. Ivanova was born in Sofia, Bulgaria, and grew up under the communist regime before moving to the USA with hopes to live the American dream. Her work is based on the experiences and knowledge she gained from her homeland and what eventually became home. And then our final and fourth artist for this group is Andreas Ramirez. His practice considers and analyzes issues unique to people of color, immigrants, and first-generation Americans in photography, installation, and video. As a child of Colombian and Salvadoran immigrants, Ramirez draws on his family's lived experience in the United States and how immigrants and first-generation Americans deal with intergenerational trauma, strained family dynamics, and the most basic sense of belonging. So I'd like to begin in the same order that I introduced our artists. I'm gonna have one for each one of them and then a group question. So Bonnie, we'll begin with you. Your installation for this show, When the World Was Mine, appears to be positioned between personal histories and the broader language of architecture and domestic spaces. The materials in the show have this clear sense of familiarity. There's drywall, spackle, ceramic tiles, as well as then some distortion and manipulation through the manner in which they're presented. Now, you describe this as a way to specifically discuss ideas related to utopia and nostalgia. So can you tell us more about the underlying investigation here and how it relates to what we're seeing in this installation?
Yeah, thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you again for moderating this panel. I super appreciate it. Well, I guess like a good place for me to start is by first like sort of addressing my terms, right? Utopia and nostalgia. What I think is really interesting about them is that they're often seen as being opposites, right? Because utopia is the symbol of progress, of like looking to the future and then trying to find a better or more perfect way of being or existing. And nostalgia is a means of looking backwards with an idealized or like often unrealistic perception of the past. And at the core of my thesis work is a critical investigation into the intersection of the two, where our ideas of utopia become intertwined with the past. And I really want to question how we carry parts of history into our visions of the future without first fully confronting the social issues that are embedded within them. And like you said, a lot of my practice is research driven. So I kind of like trace these personal histories in relation to regional architectural histories. And I do so to kind of deconstruct my own ideas of a perfect world and also address like how I am culpable in these same like problematic historical cycles. So I often will use architectural references because they are familiar, like you said, and they act as access points. So for this work, more specifically, I use these elements, these architectural elements to investigate the Seminole Heights neighborhood in Tampa, where I currently live. And I aim to trace the connection between the resurgence of design elements from the original homes in the area and the persistence of historically exclusive housing practices that have likely led to the current reconstruction and gentrification of the area. And so the tile becomes like a direct reference to this because it's something that comes from the original houses that is then being seen in the new construction in the area. You can find it at Home Depot even. The tile pattern's got octagon and dot. So it's like this remnant of the past that's being carried into the future. And then the drywall and spackle is like this reference to future construction of a space. And like you said, I distort these elements in order to complicate like not just my own relationship with them, but the viewer's relationship as well.
No, that's lovely. You connect it back to the specificity of place, being in Seminole Heights. Of course, I spent more time the past year at home.
Yes.
And thanks for defining that sense of utopia, looking forward, whereas nostalgia, looking to the past, and how you bind that all together. That was really fascinating.
Thank you.
My next question then goes to JD Hardy. Your video, Mended Quilt, at first appears to be this static projected image of a large quilt, yet over time, as you stand there, it unfolds with these subtle and really mesmerizing shifts in light, texture, and also sound, like we hear white noise and the audio of cicadas. So the use of this quilt pattern as a basis for the video feels really personal or internal, and at the same time related to larger patterns of time, of family and memory. So can you expand on this? You know, for example, why use, there's 110 videos of hand-me-down quilts and then cicada sounds specifically from the summer of 2020. And so what kind of dialogue is this meant to engage with the viewer about perception and experience?
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Amanda. That gets to kind of the heart of my work, actually. So the piece itself isn't an object. It's a hand-me-down quilt for my family. So it's a very internal object to me, a very personal object to me. But I'm taking it apart piece by piece. Like you said, it's made up of 110 individual videos. So it's a square pattern quilt if someone hasn't seen it that's listening. And so each square is a different video that I then mend back together digitally and in a digital platform. So it comes back together. And so it's kind of like these internal patterns becoming a larger object. So by taking apart the bigger pattern, I'm like dissecting the pattern within the pattern, which I think I use kind of as a symbol for looking back or taking a bigger look at bigger patterns that are happening. So I'm fragmenting it, but then also constructing it back together. And by doing these little portraits of each square, it's giving the opportunity to look at not only the patterns of color and line that are within the quilt itself, but also of manipulation and ways that the quilt has been handled over time. So the creases in the quilt and the way it's been folded and cared for is something that I discovered through doing this process of these borders or boundaries and how they're either stitched together or brought together, or what separates them as well. And I think that by connecting, the thing that kind of connects the work together is the shadow that happens at every like 1 minute and 30 seconds. The shadow passes across each square individually. So they're all kind of autonomous within the pattern. And this cycling is what I was really thinking about when I mentioned like the date that I filmed the cicadas in the summer of 2020, and cicadas have their own cycle. And the patterns of, you know, the things that were triggered in the summer of 2020, there's a list of things that happen on a global scale. And I think what I'm finding as a human is that there's cycles down to the minute level of our cellular structure, to like planetary cycles, like large as Pluto cycling the sun, that bind us together. And that if we don't take time to examine them in a way, or look at their tears and look at the things that are working and not working within the patterns themselves, like that's the only way that we can see them as cycles, and then maybe dissect it, or maybe look at things that are working or not working.
That's so lovely. I like how you phrase each square as like these individual portraits with all their little tears and the folds. It's such a lovely way to like relate to these, and then what a positive message to think about not only the fragmentation, but how these things go together and how we work with cycles. So thank you so much, JD.
Thank you.
My next question then is for Nadja. Your installation, Being a Rock Star in Your Industry is a Matter of Broken Hearts. This presents viewers with patterns and materials related to decadence, high culture, celebrity, fashion, even faith. The material choices and the way you've rendered them makes everything feel so solid, like the Adidas clothing cast in bronze, or then we have embroidery in cement. Well, at the same time, it also feels really precarious. It's susceptible to cracks or even like this thin veneer. So can you walk us through some of the symbolism you've included and how these all work together to engage in the discussion about the aesthetics of power?
Yes, thank you so much. That's a lovely introduction, by the way. And so the materials that I use usually refer, not usually, always refer to my upbringing, or from homeland to where it eventually became home. And because they're such different places, and I have I gained many different experiences from both places, from both worlds. I use symbolism as a metaphor to convey these juxtapositions between classes and even government power structures. So, for example, like the reds are usually reference to something that is really not clean, something that is corrupt, or someone who dehumanizes others for personal gains. And usually, unfortunately, in power structures, this occurs very often in some way. Sometimes it's not really visible, but other times it is, but it's incorporated into the systems so well that it's really hard to avoid. And then I love the use of velvet or more expensive materials, even bronze that has such a solid history. But the way I apply it, it's, you know, on my clothing, it's not really a piece of the clothing Adidas. It's not very symbolic much to any particular structure, other than more to the desire that we had growing up in a communist country. It comes from the West, and it was not available, and it became a luxury. And one thing was that we always looked up to the West to reach to it because it was not allowed. Eventually, when it became affordable, when I moved here, and even now today in Bulgaria, it became affordable. You realize that actually it becomes a symbol almost of an identity. And so this is how I use materials and symbolism.
Yeah, I think that it seems like such a simple observation, but these ideas like material and brands, like being this reflex of power, I think is really poignant. Thank you for that lovely discussion. I'm gonna go then to our fourth artist, Andreas. In your video installation, there's this layering of personal stories with specific historical references. The vinyl records spin and play. There's like an hour's worth of a playlist, right? And we watch as time and time again, the albums are carefully combed through and selected and then set up once again through this first person's perspective of the video. And there's this really interesting simultaneity. As you're standing there, you get kind of lost in the repetitive experience. As we watch or listen, it conjures up similar experiences you might have had, right, in your mind. So how does this video relate to your own family's histories and stories? In what way does your work also bring to light shared human experiences of belonging and visibility and even trauma?
Thank you, Amanda. That's an excellent question. And thank you for becoming a part of this as well. So the video itself, the songs come from the person's perspective that you're hearing, right? So Marlene, my aunt, she's the oldest of my mom's siblings of 10. She was the person that essentially raised a lot of us, including, you know, the kind of second generation of the family. And as they emigrated, kind of as a group, really, in kind of sections, people brought records, and she brought the majority of these albums. And so you're listening to a playlist that comes directly from Marlene's life, and not only from her life, but songs that make her think of family members or certain kind of situations that would happen, or, you know, individual people. And it's kind of lovely. It looks like someone's sound is on.
Oh.
I'm not too sure.
Yeah.
Are you ready?
I think there's Matthew behind the scenes. There we go. Turn off your. Okay, so you were telling us this lovely family story here, Andreas.
Oh, sure. So, you know, as Marlene emigrated with her siblings, she kind of became the matriarch of the family, as she kind of already was, and so it's immediately our family history and something that I wanted to preserve. She didn't have any children of her own, but like I said, she helped raise so many of us that I thought it was important to commemorate her life. And then in terms of how it kind of brings to light shared human experiences, I really think that music is kind of the key to that, right? Whether you speak the same language or not, you can kind of feel whether songs are sad and really feel like what that has to give you. And knowing that Marlene chose these songs and that these are, you know, records from her life, you get this time to think about not only with the story that she's told you and all the interstitial moments where there's, you know, a black screen with just text and voices. It's almost entirely Marlene. You very rarely hear me, and everything is translated from Spanish to English. So you get that direct connection, and then you get time to kind of think about what she said. And then if you hear something sad, then, you know, maybe something sad happened, or you know, even like the funny moment of a song called Queja, which means complaint in English. That song is associated with our family. And if you were to think of the Ramírez, where we come from, apparently a song titled Complaint is what you think of, which is kind of funny, but everything kind of ties together. And it's really about looking at details and kind of understanding what nuance there is between Latinos in the United States, this kind of very, very large generalized group, which is filled with so many cultures, so many methods and kind of dialects in terms of how people speak. It's all really kind of important and embedded. And then, of course, the nuance within even Colombia's history is built into this project. A lot of the songs come from the Atlantic region, which is not where we're from. It's entirely populated by people who are descendants of African slaves. There are some white people in that area, and some indigenous people as well, but the majority of those groups live in the mountains, kind of where we're from. And it's interesting to kind of see the connection between the different kind of cultures and the kind of hybrid culture that is Colombian culture. And just like many of the cultures in the Americas, right? Even America or the United States could be considered that as well.
I love that it's this seemingly simple gesture of music and albums, but points to those very specific, memories for you and everything associated with family and culture. But then these are really things that we often hold in common. Like that could be your song, but hundreds of other people have the same family song. So thank you for sharing that with us. Now I'll open this next question to all four of you. I'm sure the audience has been hearing some similarities between the four of you. So collectively, your artworks powerfully connect to places you have come from, rooted in personal experiences and memory. So what role do patterns and rhythms play then in communicating these ideas to the viewer? Whoever would like to go first.
Is it me? Do I go first?
Do it, Bonnie.
Okay. Well, I think for my work, at least, like, I think something that I'm interested in is like this idea of like social patterns or historical patterns as well, where like we, without fully, like I said, like addressing the social issues that are embedded within history, if we carry aspects of that going forward, we will inevitably act out the same things over and over again, right? Like a Sisyphusian, right, thing. And I think that goes also for like families as well. Like there are toxic like family cycles and behaviors that like we all like kind of like end up falling into. And it's not until you really address those patterns that like you can start to break down those cycles. I don't know. JD, you said something really interesting earlier, and I'd like to hear you answer this question.
Yeah, I was just agreeing with you a lot. Like, yeah, like if we don't actually examine these cycles or at least acknowledge them, I mean, it's just something I'm discovering. So I think it's coming out in my work now, just as like a human, just that things are connected and cyclical, and that they just like it deserves to be paid attention to. But I think so in that sense, like patterns are kind of everywhere, and rhythms are what we're made of. Like we're made of the rhythms of the like elements in our body, and like so yeah, I think it kind of starts with the very molecular and gets into time and spaces we share and like the rhythms of our conversations and things like that. I don't know if that answers your question at all, Amanda, but
yes.
I'm really like thinking about it right now in just the world and like, yeah. Andres, do you have anything?
Oh, yes.
Pass it over.
So, I mean, rhythm is kind of, my whole project is essentially about music, right? But it's really more for me and the way that I connect myself. And we kind of built these groups as a team, really, in terms of the catalog. And what we kind of came to understand was we're not only trying to understand life, but also kind of really dig at the nuance, right? Especially whether you're looking at Nadia's work or JD or really all four of us, we're all making work that is pretty tedious and kind of repetitive and specific. And it's really about, understanding that repetition and kind of getting as much out of it as you can. And, speaking for myself, my work is also a lot about nuance, right? And like how important it is to kind of understand an entire situation before moving forward.
Yeah, both detail and the larger view are important. I'm thinking too, I'm going to prompt Nadia a little bit, like in the brocade, right? That's like this overall pattern, but then like you've embedded this rat, which appears often in your work. So also, can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, I had to unmute myself. Yes, so I think that pattern, if we were to kind of make it more unified, cultures do have patterns. Like patterns are used in many different things, like pottery, rugs, like carvings and so on. And I think it's very universal. And I feel like I'm gonna just talk about the universal part for a second. I feel like people were used to patterns. I feel like a life itself is organization of certain sort, and like it's very much divided and set into particular patterns with expectations from coming on from family, from growing up, even from little, like there is a certain expectation set up like even before you were born, like what you most likely will be and how it will happen and who and names and so on. So I feel like patterns exist in very not only as like a visual right in front of us, but like as way of life. And the other thing with that I would say about patterns in my work that I would connect it to my friend's work, maybe much so like in a fashion way or as an expressional way. Pattern is used like when I think it's you want to emphasize on something to be like, even though it could be a detail, but I still think that when it's repeatedly, when it's so much repetitive, it gives you much more visual importance, I would say.
Yeah, I like that you point out like its structure and organization and expectation, and then also importance. Like there's all those layers that start to evolve as soon as you start to look at this something as simple as a pattern. And like Bonnie, I'm going to kind of go back to you for a second, like the patterns of the ceramic tile, and like that's something it's so indicative of, you know, Florida bungalows here. I'm a transplant from up north, and it just seems so specific and so rooted. And I like that you pulled that out and then distort it. I mean, can you talk a little bit about like what drew you to that pattern?
Yes, absolutely. So I also am a transplant from up north, Delaware, Pennsylvania. When I first moved down here and I moved into my house, I saw that and it felt like really special for some reason. Like I saw that pattern in my bathroom, and then it felt like a little treasure. But then I like met Andrés, and then I met like other people that lived in the area, and I was like, wow, you all have the same tile bathroom. So then I started doing more research into it, and that's when I found it at Home Depot, and then I found it available through online retailers and like all these different things. And I started to really understand how it was embedded into like this sort of set of standards and design that went into making the houses in the area that wasn't just this area alone, but also like nationally, like across the US, and how those were also tied to these other housing practices and things. And like this like visual pattern became a reference to this larger pattern that happened like socially as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I just kind of prompted you. It's like, it's those little, again, like Andrea said, the little details that also connect to these larger things. And JD, like now I'm thinking back to your work with the quilt, that, you know, this is something so personal to you, but I think most people had some like favorite blanket. Maybe it wasn't a quilt, but that also had the pattern. So like texture and like the feel of that becoming something internalized. But then you digital.
Oh, that's like, I'm glad you said something about that, because I was like thinking like the technology is a big factor in my work too, and I didn't really talk about it, but it also has its own like patterns. And I think that one thing that I try to balance in my work is like not trying to get too precise with it. So letting things have a life or an autonomous like timeline within a set timeline. Like, because when you're working in editing and video, it can be very precise. You can get down to like the frame, you know, that you want to like cut things and make things work in. So I think that keeping video like as loose and organic and like have their own kind of like surprises involved in it is something that's important to me when I'm like remaking these patterns with technology.
Yeah, and that it's gonna like nicely segue me over to Andreas to end here. Like again, yours too, it's something that's very like tactile experience, or like the warmth of vinyl, and then you're translating it through these digital tools. Can you speak about that for a little bit?
Yeah, so all the video is shot on a cell phone, believe it or not, and the kind of point of that is just to kind of keep it simple. I mean, not everyone that's here obviously knows me that well, but personally, Amanda, that I'm really kind of a keep it simple kind of person, and so it for most of this project, everything is just recorded directly through the turntable onto a computer, and then through a phone, and it's just. All of the records are high resolution scanned, and all the covers and all the kind of packaging materials. So if it's wrapped in plastic, it's probably going to stay that way, and you get to kind of see what everything really looks like. If someone has written a note on a record, or kind of written down when they got it or who it's for. In one of the records, there's actually a note from my grandmother to one of my uncles. So it's there's a lot of really kind of specific bits in there that I really wanted to capture and kind of put forward, and I just couldn't kind of leave it at just being a video. I had to have still images kind of really express how much detail there is. So if you can watch the video either online, or if you can make it to the gallery in the museum, you can't even see the pixels on the screen. There's just so many of them, and that's kind of the point, is just like show as much detail as possible.
Well, thank you for that. And thank all of you for kicking off our panel discussion as the first group. Now, if you'll all go ahead and turn off your cameras, I'd like to invite our second group of artists who were organized around the theme carnal physicality. So I'm gonna ask them to cue up their cameras while I introduce them by reading their bios. So first we have Chase Palmer, whose artwork is an illogical burlesque of overconsumption represented through a disparate overconstruction of activity. Palmer is currently preparing for his first two-person international show, and his artwork showcases an entanglement of figures sharing the same claustrophobic space. Palmer has exhibited in over 40 group exhibitions nationwide and received his BFA from Heron School of Art and Design in Indianapolis, Indiana in 2018. Our second artist is Jonathan Talit, who is interested in flesh as a membrane in the sites of negotiation between our inner and external worlds. Talit grew up in Lakeland and earned a BFA in sculpture cum laude at Boston University. He attended residencies at the Atlantic Center for the Arts, Vermont Studio Center, and Gallery 263 in Cambridge. His work is in both private and public collections. So Chase, Jonathan, hello. I'm going to start off my first question for Chase, and then the second one to Jonathan, and then once again, there's a group discussion. So Chase, for the show, you created these two really large-scale paintings. One's titled A Pinch of an Instant, and the other one is Straight Up Stanky Seeds. They include a myriad of intricately detailed collisions of bodies and textures and colors. There's humor, but also a sort of violence to the way the figures twist and distort, overlapping with objects and actions ranging from the mundane to the very bizarre. So within your practice, as I just read, you describe this as this illogical burlesque of overconsumption. Can you unpack that statement a bit more for us, specifically in relation to these paintings?
Yes, I can, because that statement is a very long mouthful.
But so many good nuggets in there.
I can distill down short to say it's just a false representation of representation. But in a way, I keep the mouthful statement because in a way the work is a mouthful and I'm a mouthful. That's just an inherent part of my personality, my own idiosyncratic personality that shows through in my paintings, It's just how it is partly I'm a participant in that. Whenever I cook my favorite burger that's topped with tater tots and mac and cheese for the cheese and baked beans and stuff. And essentially that's kind of what the paintings end up being. I fill it with all these figures, like the water one, Straight Up Shanky Seas has about 25 human figures in it with 4 ducks in it, 5 ducks in it. Added onto it also, with also, some of the figures wearing this different clothing designs and stuff that suggest multiple levels of reality and more figures and such. So it's combining that really punchy, fast read you get from paintings of motion and action and figures and saturated colors with contrast and chiaroscuro with, you know, deliberately slow read type of things. And so, yeah, false representation of representation. And of course, with it being a burlesque, I do investigate humor also. Not with any traditional like punchlines or setups, more of just like whether it is like something very violent, like you mentioned, like one of the paintings has a gentleman with a tattoo of an assault rifle, and that arm ends up being crushed by a car and broken bones and blood and things. But yeah, it always reads as funny. My paintings do. Yes.
Thank you for walking us through and some of the additional details, tater tots and barbecue. Like they have a count also, 25 human figures.
Yes.
Ducks.
Yeah,
so then my next question goes to Jonathan. Your sculptures combine both traditional and non-traditional materials to create these really large, uncanny forms. There's things like clay and glaze and paint and steel. No big deal, right? But then also velvet, iridescent pigment, packing peanuts, and even an ottoman. There's something both really alluring to some of these and also really inherently disturbing to the resulting configurations, which is emphasized by your titles also, like noir and like a cat in heat stuck in a moving car. So how do you utilize materials to hold all these forces in balance? We've got contortion and control, for example, and then how does this specifically relate to your investigations of the body and flesh?
Well, like you said, I do use a lot of different materials, but I definitely have had a fidelity towards clay, I guess, as my main form building material. And so if anyone hasn't worked in clay before, it's actually pretty annoying as a medium. Everybody in beginning ceramics thinks that they're going to be have this like romantic moment on the wheel, like Demi Moore and Ghost, and it's just going to be so easy and erotic to make these giant forms. And it's actually really time consuming and arduous and masochistic in a way, especially to make forms as large as mine in clay. But clay has to, go into your question specifically about the body, clay has to be largely hollow to be fired. So it's already this kind of container, which is why it's been so useful in terms of insulation and containing foods and liquids and things like that for humankind. But it, for me, is a nice conceptual proxy to thinking of the body as a kind of container, both of literal things like circulation, organs, but also desires and dreams, impulses, however unsightly or like cathartic or that you want to release, and that we're constantly doing this gear shift between an inner dialogue of our body that has rhythms and an agenda of which we have no control over, and then asserting our own will and desire and trying to make a negotiation between that. And so when I talk about my work being kind of like a membrane, I kind of think of flesh being the site of that negotiation where we do that. And so I incorporate a lot of the non-traditional materials, like you said, like velvet or like or not latex, but like stretchy clothes materials and things like that, because I do think of clothing and the way we adorn ourselves with makeup and things like that are some kind of way that we can attempt, however clumsily, to make that your body meet your mind. And so I try to make with the larger forms in terms of contortion and control really appear precarious, like they're in flux, like maybe perhaps that they're negotiating their own wills with their own circuitry and sensory apparatus, and that the viewer can see it, but that they're static. So there's some kind of tension in watching a sculpture appear to twist and split or close itself and heal. And I think sculpture very broadly is a great avenue to witness tension, like physical tension. And so those are the specific ways that I try to achieve that.
Yeah, I especially like that you describe this as a site of negotiation, and that the clay just kind of like inherently is holding all these actions and impulses sort of like within our own body. That's a really lovely resonance. Now for both of you, we're already kind of talking about shared characteristics, but how do each of you use material and visual elements? We discussed things like color before, to likewise investigate the collisions between high and low culture in today's society.
I can start with that. Excuse me. For me, like high and low culture is like one of the ingredients, like one of the opposites I think about in my work. There are others like stability versus instability, because during the scale of these two paintings, there's that rift between speeding and crashing and swimming and sinking. And also like extroversion versus introversion, because you have to have this extroversion to paint these type of large paintings in a way. And most of the figures are very extroverted, but yet there's an introversion required to make the paintings. But when it comes to like high culture versus low culture, it's a thing that, of course, I have to reckon with because the medium is oil on canvas. One of the most historically, maybe high art mediums, close to the top in history. And maybe in that respect, I respond to history, I respond to like how painters have painted before. And like sometimes when I use my brush strokes, I don't stray too far from how Frans Hals would have painted. But yet at the same time, Frans Hals painted like the real people of his capitalist society in the Netherlands. And I only paint the fake people that I invent, that I just make up. And so like, I mean, we can go back and forth on this, but like, of course there are low cultural things, in my paintings, like for example, Chex Mix, like there's like the Carrow painting, like on the dashboard sprayed out with all this Chex Mix, which even though I say I like very maximal weird food construction things, like Chex Mix is one of my least favorite. And it's definitely low cultural, or it's the type of thing you see at like the CVS checkout counter. It might be at like the 8th grade dance party or something. It's not an enjoyable food. But when it comes to dealing with low cultural items like that, the way it becomes like kitsch or like mean-spirited or like illustrative in a bad way is when like the artist comes into the subject with hate and then applies it to the artwork with hate, which I did not do. I painted these Chex Mix very lovingly, very meticulously, had a great time doing it, had the time of my life, like 3 tones and 3 colors for each pretzel chip.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I can't speak on Chex Mix, but I guess like, I mean, Chase and I are 90s kids. Like we're technically different generations. I'm like a latter millennial and he's a beginning Zoomer, but we grew up in a time of like the dilapidation, I think, of American culture. Like lots of people write now about decadence, that we're in a moment of decadence, and people constantly are making comparisons to the fall of Rome and stuff, and how everything's kind of dispersed and spread out and frivolous and fractured. And so I kind of think there's no way that didn't inform my sensibility or his growing up in like the early aughts with the rise of like reality TV show culture and things like that. I mean, specifically in my work, I try to bring in materials that I think are part of that history because they affected me visually and conceptually, even if at the time I couldn't think of it in terms of conceptually. But even the ottoman in the piece that I have at CAM right now is a Kelly Clarkson ottoman. And that to me just makes a lot of, I mean, I didn't seek out a Kelly Clarkson ottoman. I'm sure there are people that maybe don't believe me, but I didn't seek out a Kelly Clarkson ottoman. But to me, it just made a lot of sense that like, oh, okay, so Kelly Clarkson got her start on a reality show about singing. She was really the only one that had a like pretty legitimate career after it from that show. And then she kind of fell off And now she's back. She's got like a talk show, and now she's trying to be a kind of like Rachel Ray talk show person. And now she's going into like Martha Stewart territory, trying to like manufacture cheap domestic furniture and stuff. This is something about all of that like lowness, and that the lowness is actually mainstream, that there is actually no real distinction. It's actually much harder now to make a distinction between what's high and what's low at this time. And so I like to slam that in my sculptures as well, to cause equal kind of confusion and intrigue, I guess.
Yeah, and I think I feel that for both of you, even in your choice of colors, like there's this both kind of like natural lean to it, but then also something really synthetic that feels similar to that tension.
I should say that, yeah, because like we were both studio mates. This work that's now exhibited next to each other was created in the same room, more or less. And like there was some cross influence and stuff a bit too. Like, of course, we would have like artistic discussions, and every now and then one of us would say, come over, what do you think about this real quickly? And also like various low culture things were things that did sustain us and just maintain our friendship. Because, you know, we're both self-serious artists. We're both very pretentious and pains in the asses to deal with. But various like low cultural things are kind of what sustain us in a way. Like the other day had this one talk about Ludacris and like how great his early output was. And like, when did he fall off? Was it when he was featured in Baby with Justin Bieber?
No.
But yeah, but yeah, I guess you can speak on the colors and things like that.
Yeah, I think we both, I mean, the ludicrous debate of when he fell off, I guess we'll just have to leave that for another day, although we can come to a consensus that he indeed did fall off. But I think that the color thing, definitely him and I are obsessed with, and maybe at least I don't articulate, but the illusion between synthetic and organic. And it seems like I'm from Florida originally, Chase is not, but I think his sensibility is very Floridian too. And I think that Florida is this kind of strange mirage almost that it's kind of like hallucinatory, but very low hallucinatory, like, and it has this kind of like bacchanal feeling of people, regardless of class, they all buy the same kind of hot dogs whenever they go to the beach to get drunk and then lay about or whatever. And there's something like weirdly democratic about how Florida ignites these kind of this levity, which is a nice way of putting it, for everybody here. And I think our work in some way has that kind of same sensibility of being like transparently kind of crass and confident, when maybe the viewer expects that like this person or this thing should not be as confident or think as highly of itself as it does.
I think that's the perfect place to end it, the Florida discussion. Thank you both so much for expanding upon your work. Now, if you'll both turn off your cameras, I'd like to invite our next group of artists organized around the theme art and our environment to cue up their cameras while I introduce them. So first, Luke Myers. Luke Myers is a sculptor and multidisciplinary artist who fuses scientific methodologies and technology with natural materials and concerns. Myers earned his BA in Studio Arts from the University of Maine at Augusta. In 2020, he participated in a show at Dunedin Fine Arts Centre at the Museum of Science and Industry Art Pavilion in London. His continued participation since 2018 in an artist residency and performance cooperative Stillness has had a significant influence on his practice. Next, we have Erin Oliver. Erin is a multidisciplinary installation artist who responds to the landscape and deconstructs imagery through drawing, cutting, layering, and suspending materials in space. Oliver was born in San Diego, California, and earned an art education degree, magna cum laude, from Tyler School of Art. She received grants and residency fellowships from the Vermont Studio Center, the Ellis Beauregard Foundation, Penland School of Crafts, the Ella Foundation Pratt Emerging Artist Grant, and was recently awarded the Gasparilla Emerging Artist Award. And finally, we have Ian Wilson. Ian Wilson's painting practice is an investigation of personal experiences with the mundane and common experience of boredom and daydreaming. Wilson earned his BFA in studio art from Appalachian State University. He has been painting almost every day for 12 years and has exhibited nationally. Wilson also ran a small semi-annual interview project, Dow House, from 2013 to 2018 that has been featured in exhibitions nationally. So welcome, the three of you. I'm going to direct my first question to Luke. There are two parts to your installation. The first being this large, very sleek form that features a printer in the middle titled Credit Scene After the End of the World. And then 4 inkjet prints on canvas titled Big Cypress, Rainbow Springs, Sunken Garden, and Brooker Creek. The latter really points to these specific places or locales, while the former hints at something larger, perhaps darker, regarding a cataclysmic end. So how did these two parts work together to present observations at the intersection of nature, technology, and humanity? And what do they communicate about the ecological issues of our time?
Hi, thanks for that question. I think that hopefully we're all aware of the ecological issues of our time, at least on some level. And I think that I'm like, the place that I come into this work is not as someone who's wanting to like preach about it or like make dire proclamations or anything, but just sort of like observe along the way. So I think that looking at specific places and then adding it up is a good way of doing that, because you get this bigger picture when you you know, by zooming in. Last year, I did a project where I read the book Annihilation, the whole book out loud to an ant colony. And there's a little passage in that book that I thought was relevant to your question. So I'm just going to read it to all of you now. He says, "But there is a limit to thinking about even a small piece of something monumental. You still see the shadow of the whole rearing up behind you, and you become lost in your thoughts, in part from the panic of realizing the size of that imagined Leviathan." So that's like sort of, yeah, I don't know, that's my thoughts about climate change. I think that I use technology very intentionally to like question if we can like have it be a tool that like brings us closer to the environment rather than further away. That's like the thing that I'm not really sure that we can, but I'm like wondering if we can and trying to find ways that we can, because I think that that's like really important if we're ever like gonna, you know, start caring about the world around us or whatever. Yeah.
I like that you point that out, because a lot of people would think of technology as something that puts us further away from nature or natural processes, but here you are kind of like using it as a way to draw us back and connect us back to the world. So thank you. My next question then is for Erin. Now, your installation, which is titled "The Next Few Fleeting Moments Are Ours," unfolds through these really meticulous and lovely cut sheets of white paper, which are layered through what's normally this like transitional space in the museum. Then you then added all this light and shadow. There's this sense of an extended bodily experience because the viewers were allowed to move through them, right? And calls to mind the natural world, but one that's also reconfigured and mysterious and ephemeral. So what is the importance then of abstraction for your work to create that kind of experience? And how does this relate to nature, the landscape, and bodily perceptions?
Abstraction is pretty vital to how I approach my work and my practice because it allows an exploration of these divergent notions and understanding of our relationship to the natural, both our part within it as well as our separation from it. And it allows this openness to my practice as well as to formal approaches and interpretations of the work and opens up ways of seeing that are not necessarily linear or direct, but are more intuitive and responsive and kind of open our sense of awareness. It also adds a sense of mystery or magic, in that sense of wonder and not knowing, which I really enjoy exploring. In terms of like dealing with the landscape, I think it really opens up spaces to explore different possibilities or variables of our perceptions of reality versus like actual reality, or the varying layers of reality, into a more ambiguous space where you can kind of navigate the lines between those different spaces. I also, a side note is the process of the installation had an element of abstraction too, in the way that I was constructing these in my studio in pieces and kind of holistically planning them out in my mind. But when they didn't really exist until I entered that space. And so there's this really abstract process of piecing it together and coming up with how the whole might be organized. Abstraction also allows me to bring beauty to the forefront, and it has this lyrical quality or rhythm, which sometimes can get lost when you have too many signifiers of representation. But at the same time, my work is not purely abstract. It's kind of on a continuum. Specifically with this piece, there's definitely some elements that are more direct representation, but then it starts to shift between these moments and the more abstract forms and spaces. So I like that there's the suggestion of form, but it allows these opportunities for different perspectives, and no straightforward answers. The viewer can kind of bring their own interpretations, and it starts to take away the sense of time and specificity and tangibility. But at the same time, it definitely comes from these patterns from nature that I've abstracted, but we still recognize them. We still have this sense of them. Our brains start to piece these things together, and it still taps into that response, that those biological responses that we have that really create like calm or lowering stress, and you still get those notions even with this completely artificial environment.
Yeah, you definitely go through all sorts of things as you explore through that hallway. But I especially want to point out that phrase you said a bit ago about how the external exploration invites internal exploration. I hope people keep that in their mind as they go and visit the space. Now we have Ian. So for the show, you created 6 paintings, each gridded with blocks of shape and color that create these abstracted yet very familiar vistas. And you write that your practice is an investigation of personal experiences with mundane and common experiences of boredom and daydreaming. And I just wanted to reiterate that because I think it's so interesting and apt for considering your work. So what is it about daydreaming that you find so alluring as a subject for investigation? And then how do you translate these experiences through abstraction in the medium of painting?
Well, I came to these conclusions about boredom and daydreaming initially through this idea in painting called The Bridge of Empathy, and it's usually found in like romantic or sublime painting, where the spectator engages with transcendence. And I was thinking about all the work I made, and it's like, yeah, I painted some landscapes, but I also painted things like windows or airplane interiors. And I was thinking, that's not really, some of these things aren't necessarily sublime in nature. So I decided to think about, what do I do in these spaces? And I thought a lot about it. And when I look out and I experience these things, these mundane things, I usually find myself daydreaming or fantasizing because I'm bored. And I find that boredom and daydreaming in some ways is kind of a transcendental experience, because you are looking out into kind of a void in a way. And I thought that the best way to convey a maybe like an internalized kind of perspective of how I like perceive maybe a fantasy or a daydream is to think about it in terms of abstraction. And my initial interest in abstraction comes from, you know, Cubism, the Steel, Bauhaus, and artists that really kind of utilize kind of a grid to create like a structural abstraction. But I also have this problem with dealing with this kind of idea of romantic painting and the sublime. So, you know, layering a grid allows me to kind of reimagine these spaces, although it does negate, you know, the sublimity of, I guess, romantic painting. So it's not necessarily so much about the sublime as it is places more of the work into like a kind of romantic tradition of painting. But the grid allows me to reimagine these kind of common spaces like windows, railings, seascapes, airplane windows, airports. It allows me to create like small geometric abstractions that are playful in nature. And I find this kind of sense of play just a great way to convey something kind of fantastic and dreamlike in my mind. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, and I like how you thread through the romantic tradition of painting romanticism and the sublime as like reinterpreted through the grid of like more modernist movements, and then that relates to some kind of idea of boredom as transcendental experience. I'm going to remember that little nugget for a while. So now I'd like to direct a question to all of you. So each of you touch on forces that border between the tangible and intangible, science and imagination, which is perhaps even a little magical, as it was referenced a bit ago. So how do you each utilize the sense of mystery and observation from those kinds of forces to help us better understand the world around us? And then what's the effect? Luke, I think you're muted. Oh, it just re-muted. There you go.
I recently started using the app iNaturalist, where you can just take photos of like plants and then it tells you what they are and like adds them to like an index of like everyone's contributions. And I think like so that's one end, that's like the amateur biologist level of observation, and it's sort of, you know, that's science. And then mystery is like on the other side, and there's something really interesting when you see an animal that or a plant that you don't know what it is, and you're like really curious about what it is, and it like holds your attention. I think sometimes when you name it, then it's like, okay, I know what that is, and you can move on. So I think that like, you know, I definitely want my work to exist somewhere between those two things, where I don't want it to be like didactic at all, but I want it to make you not sure what it is, so that it holds your attention with mystery and magic. But also the observations that I make and the observations that are being created within the work, I think are important. Obviously the science that biologists do is super important. So
Yeah, and even you talk about like that mystery, like we can see the trees that are being printed, but then they're getting like obliterated, which makes them more obscure. Erin, were you gonna jump in there?
Sure. Yeah, so I really appreciate the dynamic of the magical and the mysterious, but also allowing the viewer to see how it's constructed, see that it's fairly simple materials and methods, a kind of lo-fi magic that's somewhat accessible, but it still has the qualities that have that sense of mystery and no direct like answers or responses, but it also has this potential to really suggest worlds or kind of like transport the viewer into this new space and create this sense of movement that also starts to connect back to the landscape. So there's kind of this in between. So the viewer may only get the sense of awe, or they might pick up on the sense of fragility, or you know, there's different variables that can connect back to that.
Yeah, and I guess in regards to me, I think what's more, I don't know, magical than, you know, this tradition of, you know, romantic painting and this idea of spirituality. And I feel like in my work, it comes through with using like this grid as like a compositional format of a cruciform, and kind of realizing that these things I'm painting themselves are also cruciforms. And I think that kind of adds this kind of symbolic spiritual quality that's, you know, somewhat magical in itself, and breaking everything down into these, you know, tiny magical little shapes of color to construct just like this larger image is
Yeah, and you're even like really inviting the viewer in. Like when I went to see it in person, and you think you have a sense of it when you stand back, but then I was so surprised when I got closer. There's these moments of thin washes, and then others that are these thick impasto. So like, again, transformation, and to borrow Erin's word earlier, transportation. You're bringing us to this different place, even with the material.
yeah. I mean, it sounds corny, but like I always tell everybody, it's like painting really is magic, you know. It sounds dumb, but I believe it. I think it's true. That's why I paint. So
Well, Luke, you had mentioned something about earlier in our conversations about science just being magic that we don't quite understand yet, right? And there's some of that harness in yours.
Yeah. I brought up that quote that I love from Arthur C. Clarke, where he says that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I feel that way about the printer. I mean, when you like look inside it, I mean, obviously there's people that understand exactly how it's working, but for me, it's just like, you know, it feels like it's like just creating something out of like almost nothing. It's like, yeah, it's so like weird how it works. I've recently been exploring working with a camera gimbal, because I think that's the same way, where it's like the motors of the camera gimbal, you know, all work together to stabilize the camera. And it's like the stabilization is like the same. If anyone's ever like held a chicken and then like moved, and it's like head stays in one place and body's moving, it's like exactly what happens with a camera gimbal, but it's like it's somehow this like technological recreation of it. It's amazing. Yeah.
And I'll end by kind of pointing back to Erin real quick. Like even for yours, there's this bit where we think we understand the installation we get in. I just remember when I was moving through, and in the middle, totally different kind of experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I really was interested in how you like develop as the space progresses, and you know, you keep exploring, and it just opens up into this kind of bubble in the center. And there was an unexpected thing for me too that happened during the installation, which kind of is my favorite moment, where you just feel completely part of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got to keep going because you're completely Well, thank all three of you so much for your comments. And I'll ask you to now turn off your cameras. But before I get to our fourth group of artists, I'd just like to remind our audience that we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So go ahead and use that feature of our webinar to type in your questions for the artists at any time, really. And those will be addressed at the end of the event. So now I'd like to introduce our final group of artists who are all organized around the theme, That's Absurd. So our first artist is Leonidas Dezes. He's a digital media artist who looks for meaning in the apparently frivolous aspects of play, humor, and levity. Dezes received his BA in digital arts from Stetson University, where he performed as part of the professor-student collective Mobile Performance Group, and performed at the historic Athens Theater in DeLand. After graduating, Dezes worked as a graphic designer for Hearst Television's network of news stations and provided animation for Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign. Our next artist is Laura Pérez Insua, who is an interdisciplinary Cuban artist living in Tampa, Florida, who makes work that questions perceptions of power. Her current practice focuses on the unveiling of power and its rituals, and contemplations on the social and political conditions of the US by the humble opinion of an outsider. Perez Insua exhibited at the 2015 Havana Bienal and at the Cultural Projects Office in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. Recent exhibitions include group shows at the University of South Florida. Our next artist is Lisa McCarthy. Lisa uses the language of painting, drawing, and performance to fluidly move between styles, materials, and processes. McCarthy is from the Boston area and received her BFA from the School of Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts University. Recent exhibitions include Factory Mart Gallery in Massachusetts, the Carolyn and Wilson Gallery in Tampa, and at Tennessee State University. McCarthy will be exhibiting at 621 Gallery in Tallahassee later this summer. And then our final artist is Maxwell Parker. Maxwell is a tinkerer. As a sculptor, he makes machines that focus on kinetic, potential, radical, and extreme forms of energy. Parker earned his BFA in sculpture and drawing from the State University of New York at Plattsburgh. His work has been featured in exhibitions hosted by both art and science spaces. Most recently, he had a solo exhibition at the Stephanie Ann Roper Gallery in Frostburg, Maryland. He was also the recipient of the Stanton Storer Fellowship. So our final group of artists. Hello, everyone. I'm going to start with my first question. Hi, for Leonidas. In your work, which is called Total Insanity, the Retrospective, really love that title, viewers are taken along a journey with the artist as protagonists through a live stream extravaganza that is part variety show, part self-conscious commentary, and part improv. It also seems to question our understanding of self in the world. What is art anyway, right? I'm really intrigued by your statement in which you draw comparisons with your work to the absurdity and irreverence in the Dada movement, as well as memes and niche internet groups. Can you expand upon this? And ultimately, why use the language of digital streaming to communicate these ideas?
Thank you once again for hosting this or moderating it. And it's a great question. So yeah, in the time of the Dada artists, they were basically responding to like the brutality and carnage of the First World War with like like as you said, irreverent, absurdist humor. And basically a lot of scholars and things, they see it as like an alienated response to basically, things are supposed to be civilized. We're supposed to be, making progress. And here we are being like basically brutal, horrific, people in World War I, and it was basically, they were basically reacting to just like the horror, and with this nonsensical absurd humor, because it's almost like the only way. It's like when it's so overwhelming, it's almost like you have to step outside of like it was basically like a rejection of the dominant like ideology and everything. And so I see a similarity with today's memes and, you know, niche internet culture, basically in the way that like we're living in such like a crisis-ridden age. Even before the pandemic, there was, you know, obviously, and still is, the challenge of climate change, economic, racial, gender inequality, you know, just capitalism in general, just kind of like reaching its limits, I think. But yeah, and so I think like in this communal art of memes, I see them as like this kind of communal art form. I see it as a similar reaction to the it's, you know, it's not exactly the same, but it's a similar like rejection of like the dominant. It's like we're gonna at least like make fun of things. We're gonna at least have fun. We're gonna at least try to make sense of it all and try to. It's not necessarily always a like a complacency, because there are a lot of memes I look at and stuff. There's like these super like niche groups where there's like philosophical memes, like art theory memes, political theory memes. So in a way, it is like sharing ideologies, but in this just like completely new and different way. And then I have no idea how long I've been talking already. As far as the why live streaming, when I first like discovered, most live streaming is, you know, like video game people, and when is art streams, a lot of times it's just watching somebody like paint or something, and those are fine and have their place and everything. But the streams I discovered, they were basically like these types of like wild, like they had been like nothing I'd ever seen, and my first impression was like, this is like a microcosm of the internet. It kind of like takes the visual language of memes, mixes it with like the chat features and call-in abilities of like talk shows and stuff like that. And so first of all, I just saw it as this form as like encapsulating kind of that whole culture. And then additionally, the way like this absurdity, this absurd humor operating in live streaming, in the way that the humor operates outside the conventional ideology, the live stream is also, at least, even though, you know, it's facilitated by companies like huge YouTube, like Google owning YouTube or whatever, or Twitch, even though it's facilitated by these companies, it still is kind of like a peripheral space to traditional broadcasting. In the past, you used to have thousands of dollars of equipment to even send a broadcast out. And now all you need is a computer and internet connection. You can be your own broadcaster. And so there's this additional communal element, not only in broadcasting, but with people chatting and people interacting with each other through the viewers and the host and going back and forth. It's a way to like process our collective anxiety, I guess I'd say. And then finally, I just thought it was really new and exciting and combined a lot of my interests, like music, animation, everything, and it seemed pretty fun to do. So yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot overlapping in video, and I like that through line from Dada, and when the world doesn't make sense anymore, then who needs sense anyway? So thank you. I'll take our next question now over to Laura. Your video, Hombre Nuevo, sets up a central figure, this old white scholarly man, and as he sits behind a desk surrounded by like stacks and stacks of books, we listen, and he goes on about revolution, like capitalism, radicality, action, and even violence. And there's this trust built up between the viewer and the protagonist, this authoritative figure who then is revealed at the end to be more or maybe less than he seems. So how does this relate to your own experiences and perceptions of power? And in what way does this artwork push back against them or offer up a form of critique?
Thank you, Amanda. This video informs my personal history coming from Cuba, my experiences in both totalitarian and capitalist systems. This piece implies a critique of revolution, of the utopian kind of revolution. So I come from a country where revolution represented the oppressed, but as soon as it took power and the state returned, it established a repressive and totalitarian order. In that sense, I distrust the word revolution, and I think this video embodies that feeling. In this piece, as you well said, the man, the scholar, is the figure of power, a man that with his ideas could possibly lead to a radical system change. systemic change, but he decides not to. This man, full of contradictions, exposes the gap between the dream, the utopia, and the crushing reality. So the way I question power in this work in particular is by making the character powerless. A man slash mermaid, a mythical creature who is castrated from the possibility to do something because he's wearing this shiny and ridiculous mermaid tail. So he represents the end of utopia and the acceptance of the world capitalist system. So in the last scene of my video, when the viewer can see the man wearing the mermaid tail, is when the subversion of power occurs. That last scene, when you can see this man vulnerable, like wearing the mermaid tail, when you can see all the stage and like all the camera and equipment like behind the scenes, when he's reading quietly a book after he declares his complicity with the system, and he proposes a different type of revolution, the one that does not need sacrifice or violence. So this video is kind of like my position or like my statement regarding left-wing politics and like how disappointed I am like of socialism and capitalism, and how I see myself in that man, because I agreed with like that contradiction, that same ideas that are from the left, but at the same time are different because you know, I don't believe in the dream or the utopia, both totalitarian or consumerist or capitalist.
Yeah, I mean, the video so clearly kind of outlines or creates that situation where it's clear structures of power, but then, as you said, the end just rendered completely vulnerable by the flick of a mermaid tail in sequins, right? Thank you so much. Now turn to Lisa. The series of paintings that you've included in the show, which are collectively titled Impulsive Transgressions, are a riot of colliding colors, figures, and situations. There are paintings such as Catman, The Art Teacher, Always Too Drunk to Be the Bride, Klepto, and my personal favorite, You Can Have My Artichoke. In your work, how do you use storytelling to delve into things like gender bias and satire? And what do they communicate to viewers about the tension between impulse and control?
Well, thanks for that question, Amanda. Well, I suppose storytelling is kind of the root of my inspiration for the paintings. And the stories that speak the most loudly to me personally revolve around gender bias and humor. And humor, I've heard, is sort of life's pressure valve. And I definitely explore all facets of that. And through the process of translating these stories into an image, I ride a line between impulse and control. And it just naturally shows up in the work for the viewer.
Yeah, I'm gonna remember that bit about humor as a pressure valve, because I think especially in today's situation, and there's so much of that like at play at all the different paintings. And now then to Maxwell, your work can be found in two places. Push Truck Hunk Construction, which is a video and platform inside the museum. And the second, located just outside, is the larger sculpture Push Truck Honk. Your constructions take on these fascinating lists of materials and combinations, almost Home Depot meets playground meets mad scientist, that I really enjoy. There's this inherent whimsy but really sincere fascination. So for you, what's the role of energy and imagination in your work? And how do you use these to engage the viewer's perceptions, both conceptually and physically?
Yeah, so like my work really is about energy and kind of creating a space for energy to be dispersed, right? So I create these kind of like things that either embody people's actual movements or things to get energy out. Like this one uses somebody's body to power it. It's kind of this large push truck type thing. Yeah, and like it's just kind of like a space to be in, a space to play. Yeah, I wrote a bunch of things down. They're all jumbled now. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because you can get inside the truck, right? And for
right.
who's watching, if they go, they can go up and interact with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It kind of embodies people's energy, and it uses movement to show that. Yeah.
Yeah, and all sorts of exploration. I love
the
van door on the front, I guess.
Yeah, it kind of uses like directions. Like the things on it kind of hint to what you can do, and then like your imagination of what, like you see this thing and then you see these different parts, and your imagination kind of leads you to interact with it, and then you can kind of create your own story of like who made this and like how it works and how you want it to work, you know. So there's a bunch of different like choose your own adventure kind of things going on. Yeah,
absolutely. So now for all of you, you each touch upon humor in the absurd, but also of unexpected transformations, whether through certain views, circumstances, or impulses. And so why for each of you are these such powerful tools? Why use them to push against larger systems of power or expectation or authority? Go for it, Leonidas.
Okay. As I kind of mentioned before, I guess for me, because they operate outside of these conventional parameters, they allow for like an alternative or removed view that is kind of in defiance of the limits placed by the dominant ideology of the time. I have a quote from artist and writer David Robbins about like basically being a jester. He has a book called Concrete Comedy. To adopt the role of the jester is to signal that you've given up any claim to becoming a king. Paradoxically, this conscious abdication is precisely the basis of the jester's own power. Now, out of competition for the throne, the jester is free to pursue something other than the throne. This is its own kind of threat. And so, I don't know, I'll start off with that. That's my my 2 cents.
That's good.
Well, I guess I'm next. I use humor and absurdity in my pieces to question power. I appropriate forms, behaviors, and structure of powers and slightly transform them. In Hombre Nuevo, for example, I use the interview format. I appropriate some Noam Chomsky's words and ideas to create a recognizable situation, something you have seen or heard before, but I change that at the end when the viewer sees something unexpected, perhaps funny. So in that sense, I think humor, irony, and absurdity are really powerful tools and useful tools when you're seeking to subvert or question power, and I use them often in my work because of that.
Yeah. Lisa, I'm gonna prompt you next.
Yeah.
Sorts of things with yours.
Well, yeah, mine's more than ever, like I feel that due to our obsession sort of as a society with categorizing people, labeling them, labeling them to normalize, understand, and compare ourselves to them, we wind up missing the larger picture. And I think the four of us, sort of offer a fuller exploration of complex and open-ended narratives from as many points of view as possible. So I think we all do it because it allows us to present or speak uncomfortable truths, that maybe the viewer doesn't want to hear or may may hear because it's done in a humorous way.
Yeah, there's so many like serious moments in yours too, like the Always Too Drunk to Be the Bride weddings, that kind of thing. There's huge amounts of expectations, right?
Yeah.
And you can share some of the like the little ways you're dismantling that in the painting.
Yeah, well, for instance, that is really about, from a female perspective, that, you know, what, you know, life's milestones that we're supposed to adhere to, and whether it's getting married or any, you know, thing we're supposed to attend, and Always Too Drunk to Be the Bride is just like you never really make it, because these are these false expectations that are put on us. And so I've put like the bride with this big veil coming off her with a Mickey Mouse veil, and a woman puking into a toilet, and sort of a bum with a Tampax string hanging out because she's too drunk to. So, you know, not that it's personal experience, but but it's just all these crazy, you know, societal norms that are put on us that are through satire, right? That I think are just as crazy as my painting.
And I feel a lot of this in Maxwell, yours work too, because there's so much like, don't touch this, don't do that. And you're like, nah, I'm gonna do all those things.
Yeah. My sculpture seems to work best right now in spaces that have these kind of expectations of, you go into this space and you not necessarily don't touch anything, but like, be careful, be safe, stay away. These things are grand. So I kind of want to create a space that releases people from those expectations in these spaces that have those expectations, and just like kind of have fun and create more of like an interactive. I really like interactive museums. So I kind of try to bring that into other spaces, that kind of feeling and that inquiry and exuberance and joy.
Yeah, because I mean, museums, you're not supposed to typically touch things and
right.
Unless you're invited to do so. But even like there's a little detail for the piece inside where you took an extension cord and you brought it up to the ceiling. And so even, I've been to the CAM many times, but I started to look at the space just a little bit differently, just through this simple gesture of an orange extension cord.
Yeah. I love pulling power from different places and bringing it, you know, like bringing it to my sculpture. I'm like just taking, you know, so yeah.
And there's some, I'm thinking now that kind of brings me back to Leonidas, like through the course of your live stream video, like you're like a humble art student trying to figure things out, and then you save a guy who's this like Daddy Warbucks kind of rich figure, and then all these things are available, all the equipment you need.
Mm-hmm. Oh, what's the question, I guess?
Well, just like thinking about, again, using these like humorous gestures to talk about these larger expectations, like as a student as the protagonist in the video, like you're dealing with all the weight of like, I have to make these wonderful artworks, and how do I even do that, and how do I pay for it?
Yeah, and I guess, yes, some of it, I don't know, in using the narrative of fantasy and like it mixes like, you know, what actually it's a really like a meta thing, you know, that mixes like, I sometimes worry if it's too much like focus on just like my personal experience, but yeah, using the narrative to be able to like expand out and kind of like mix the fact and fiction, kind of like, and just kind of like muddle. I don't know, I was looking into this basically new, it's not like, it's already I guess maybe controversial to suggest something after postmodernism, but I was reading a lot about this new ism called metamodernism that basically is like about oscillating between it's kind of like learning from postmodernism, but kind of incorporating like still maybe forward progress or momentum to get somewhere. I feel like I'm kind of rambling now, but basically within that, there's this thing called post-irony, and how there's like sincere intention and ironic intention become confused. And so just playing with all that, and it's just kind of, it allows for like a freedom and just a fun that kind of just almost, it acts as like, in a way that I talked about, like humor acting as like a challenge to power. It acts as kind of just like a challenge to like our current reality. And we're bringing it, but it doesn't stop there, because bringing in that meta-modern ethos, it's like, okay, we can escape it, we can have fun with it, we can muddle things, but at a certain point, maybe we should try to come together to at least make some type of sense and understanding of where we are, and figure out how we can try to move forward.
Well, I feel like I could go on a lot more with all of you, but thank you so much for your thoughtful responses, and to all of our 13 artists, thank you for being so thoughtful and generous with your comments. At this point, we're going to turn back to our audience for the Q&A portion. So I'd like to invite all 13 to go ahead and turn on your cameras as we prepare to hear the first question. There's everyone, I think. Gotta do like a quick head count, right? So Dave, whenever you're ready with the first question, I know that's coming in from lots of places. We've got Facebook and Instagram, and then those of you here with us on Zoom for the webinar.
That's right. That's right. This has been a really fun talk with so many people. I think it's gone really, really smoothly. A number of questions have come in, and I'm going to be alternating asking these few questions with CAM Club officer Eric Kostelik. So that's part and parcel of CAM Club getting involved. Very good. So the first question I have here is for Andres. In keeping with the idea of social and cyclical patterns, Andres, do you think the historical social issues you explore within the Latinx migrant experience are similar to migrant experiences around the world?
Yeah, so the person who asked that question, by the way, is Carla Aguayo, which is super. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's kind of a more specific. It's kind of looking for a specific answer, I would say, and I think it's super important to kind of dispel myths about like what the immigrant experience is like, and what it means to assimilate, and also the kind of interconnectedness that we all share, right? The kind of idea as America, of America as this kind of melting pot, but still feel like there are forces that are maybe trying to homogenize things. And I would say that the efforts that I'm maybe putting forth in my own work about the migrant experience, and also the kind of greater migrant experience, is that I don't know, it's good to have nuance and to talk about how, where we all come from, whether it's Nadia or Laura or, any of us here that are born in the States, like bringing that, the experience forward and kind of trying to understand it within the context of each other is super important. So I would say, yeah, it's super connected, but, trying to lay a stake to maybe this is how these Colombians got here.
Very, very good. Eric, if you have a question, primed, good time.
Okay. Yep. For my next question, it came from the audience, and it's for everyone actually. It's who's staying in Tampa? Does anyone have plans to move elsewhere, and how might this affect your works?
Ooh, good question. I almost want to direct that to Bonnie as another transplant. We talked about living in Seminole Heights. I'm just gonna call you up.
Yeah, I am not staying in Tampa. I'm likely going to move to Pittsburgh in June. I am excited to be somewhere else and sort of like maybe get familiar with the area through my practice and like through my research and things like that. Maybe that answers the question. But I feel like oftentimes when I move somewhere, I get to know the place really by making work about it.
And new places. Anyone else? Jump. Big plans?
I'll be in Tampa for the next several months.
In the short term. How about you, Nadja? I saw you unmute.
Yeah, I hope I will not stay here too long, but I am not sure yet. I will try not to.
Same. Maybe I'll stay here for a year top, because I want to move up north, because I don't know, I want to try something different, because I come from Cuba and the weather is kind of the same, or like it's like, you know, too similar, and I want to try something new. And yeah, I think about the work, every place will affect my work in a good way, and would inform it. So I think maybe if I move somewhere else, my work will change, not drastically, but like some there's, you know.
You'll see a snow mythical creature next instead of mermaids.
I'll be staying here. I kind of live here. I've lived here for like 15 years now, but eventually I'll be leaving, I think.
My life isn't. Oh, sorry, Max.
No, go
Look,
for
we
it.
both started at exactly the same time. Me and Max live together, so we're on the same wavelength. Yeah, my life is a mystery. I'm applying to teaching jobs everywhere. I'm applying to graphic design jobs and stuff for whatever I can get. Might stay in Florida, might go somewhere else. As far as I'm gonna keep streaming. I was about to do the last episode of Total Insanity today, but then I decided that I didn't feel right. So I'm just gonna keep having an online presence and keep trying to, maybe as the pandemic opens up, try to do some on location streams and things like that, for either from galleries or from wherever.
Yeah, I'm getting out of here. I'm gonna get out of here, and then my work is gonna change, I think, a lot, because I've always not always, but I've made the mass majority of my work in kind of like a scholastic setting, right? So it's always been talking about issues that I've kind of faced in school, which like dealing with energy and people telling me what to do, telling me what not to do and stuff like that. So it's gonna be a little different. I'm gonna have to find some more source material. Yeah, but I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I think that so many of you are trying to leave quickly. We went to JD and then back to Dave. I know there's a lot of
yeah, I was just gonna comment on that too, Amanda. I think like after graduate school, it's a good springboard. Like we all have a lot of energy with new work, and we want to kind of go out and test out the waters. It's not. I think that's why everybody's just like sounding really excited to leave. Like we're just kind of like ready to jump out and see what's next. And yeah.
Full of energy from this last year, ready to go out. All right, Dave, what's our next question?
Yeah, great answers too. This is from Sue Havens. She says, Lisa, how did you decide what to include in your MFA exhibition? You've always been very prolific with different branches of work happening simultaneously. And so I'd like to know what the selection process entailed for you. Also, she says, congrats.
No, thanks, Sue. Yeah, that was the hardest part, was because I had like probably double the paintings that are there. And the committee and I edited through that these visually look like they came from the same person. And and they were both painting and drawing and storytelling. They kind of had that, and they were on a smooth surface, whereas the paintings that are not here, some of them are on canvas and they didn't really fit in visually. So, and I had worked on these through storytelling. The story was the big part of this series. So that's how it happened, Sue. But thank you for congratulating me. And everyone else too.
Wonderful. Actually, I have a question for Erin. I was actually able to personally wander through the Contemporary Art Museum a little bit ago, and I was wondering if you had any thought over certain materials that you would use, or how the public would interact with your work, and if that really changed how you designed or laid out your work itself?
So typically I would use materials that people can touch, and there were actually a lot of questions drawn up with that with COVID and in the museum context. And, you know, I've used materials before that can be a little bit less approachable, and paper is one of those that people, and it's also something that people want to, like, are curious about. They want to touch it. It's safe to touch it. In places it's actually forced upon them to touch it. Like they really have to make an effort to not touch it. And, you know, because of that, some people can be a little bit hesitant to want to go through, or even Leo, he was working with SK to meander through on the virtual tour, and he every time he just tries to like really awkwardly change his body so that he can't touch anything, which is really hilarious, but people respond to it in really different ways.
Hey, I just didn't want to mess it up. I didn't want to run over your.
No, I thought it was cute.
I totally understand that. I'm almost 7 feet tall, and I wandered through there, and it was a fun experience.
Well, this is less a specific question and more an observation that came in early. Eric, I think I'm going to snag this one from you because it's right in front of me right now. Mike, and I'll read as the question was written. My question is for JD Hardy concerning the reoccurring cicada cycle that will bring the 17-year cicadas to the mid-Atlantic, especially in Maryland. Was she aware that they will be returning to this region in a couple of weeks, and the children and adults in the area are amazed by the phenomena, can already notice holes in the soil from which the cicadas will emerge? The nostalgia theme of the artists, such as creases in the quilt, etc., I find relevant because during the cycles of 17 years, I have vivid memories of them in relationship to milestones in life, such as the fact that the cicadas were swarming at my uncle's funeral, and as a small child, I remember they sounded their wings like a flying saucer.
Wow, that's an awesome question and memory, and I do know that the cicadas are in the process of coming back, and I think it's kind of one of those, I think, things that I'll remember is making this piece and then having it line up to this, because I didn't know that going into it. The cicada cycle in Florida is like yearly. So it's kind of like, for me, it's like this thing that ties me to this location. But yeah, knowing that there's such a big shift about to happen with the 17-year cycle of those cicadas is very, like, I think for me, it's important personally because it kind of lines up in that way. But you're speaking to exactly the thing I was talking about with like the creases and the way that these kind of cycles do create patterns on the fabric of our lives, if you will, like, want to get all metaphorical about it. But yeah, so I do know about the cicadas, and it's really cool. I wish I could go up and see it. I have a friend there, so hopefully she'll send me pictures.
Yeah, it's absolutely deafening.
I bet it's quite an event.
Eric, I'm not sure if we have more questions or if we've reached the end of what has come to us.
Yeah, I think we've reached the end. Thank you, everyone.
Yay.
Yeah, I feel like
Thanks,
we need to do that round of applause. You guys have been really, really wonderful. I think Leslie was going to say some words in closing, perhaps. But again, just congratulations. And I'll just say, as she's getting ready, really encourage anyone who's listening to go and see the show in person or do the virtual tour on USF's website. They're really, really tremendous.
Could, before I do, there was a couple questions. I think somehow they got all jumbled.
You're
could
right.
Could we continue for another 5 minutes, and I'll just post this one?
Yes.
From Paul Dezes. It says we're visiting.
Jesus, my dad.
Jesus.
Sorry,
Oh, it's your dad. Oh, he said we're visiting from out of state to view the exhibit event, and though we are vaccinated, may we still interact with Maxwell's sculpture? That's a question to you, Max.
Yeah, just wash your hands, dude. Like, yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like, okay, so here's the deal. It's like a yes, short answer, yes. But maybe ask me, like, come find me or something like that first, and I can show you it. And that might be the best way of doing it. Yeah.
Interesting answer. Another question came in, I think, Leslie, that I hadn't seen before, and we'll have to revisit this method of getting the questions because they start to scoot in under the door. From James Bohari, as a painter, professor emeritus, congratulations, Max. Your talk is very pure and straightforward, and I would like to address some of your colleagues. In spite of all art being political, some more so than not, what else can a political stand do to put food in people's mouths rather than just ideas? I ask this question because most recently I have been involved with coming to grips with doing something more than my minimal political stand. It's a big question.
I think that's a pertinent question. Is it for everybody?
I think it is for
Or for
everybody.
Max?
I think
Oh.
it's for all artists, and it starts with addressing Max's work, but I think it's for artists.
Yeah, I think that's a really relevant question and something that I do think about, and I will continue to think about, like, how does my work transfer out into the world? And I think like that's something for me personally, like the MFA has been a really good place for me to kind of cocoon in, to like turn this internal investigation externally and like start actually looking at the bigger picture in this, in our society and things like that. But I'll let other people answer. I've already talked.
I want to just ask, is it about, because most of the, some of the works are political more than others, how is that question?
That's a good question. That question is a good question about the question.
I can answer that.
Yes.
Oh, I just say it can happen. I don't know. And there are various examples of it can happening. Like, for example, like, wasn't that Mike Kelly's last ever piece before he passed away? His last piece was a food truck, you know, because he believed that participatory art should directly benefit the community. So it can happen, you know. You can literally put food in people's mouths. And the amount of food or what food you put in people's mouths is completely up to you as the artist. Or it could be up to them, or by chance.
I think both Luke and then Bonnie want to respond to that too.
Yeah, you can go, Bonnie, if you're ready.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay, I would say that, like, maybe I think art is best when it's used as a tool of communication. So the best thing that you can do is communicate ideas to people that then they can take forward into their lives, right? Because as an artist, I'm not here to answer questions for you, I don't think. I think I'm here to kind of like pose questions, or at least that's my stance with it, is that I'm here to have you try to question your own position in relation to things, so that way you can maybe come up with your own new understanding or something. So I don't know if that feeds anyone's, gives anyone food, but I think that that's maybe my position, is just that art is a tool of communication for you that then to make changes in your personal life. Mic drop, I don't know.
I think that like, to sort of respond to what you just said, Bonnie, I think a lot of times we make work that we hope starts a dialogue or leaves you, you know, leaving the gallery with some questions that you maybe then bring up to somebody else later. And then those conversations lead to the kind of social change that we're hoping to like address or instill in the work. But I want to talk about something that's happening with my work like right now, which is that there's this thing that happened last week where USF like solicited development proposals for this property that they own. It's like wetlands, and you know, it's called the Forest Preserve, but it's actually not preserved yet. So there's this big, like, in the biology department, there's this big like group action happening to try to really conserve this land. And I realized that the skills that I have as an artist would be useful to them. So I reached out, and like, I'm not trying to necessarily make my own work there, but I have all these like video and photography skills that I've got through the projects that I've done. And I just said, hey, like, I want to interview you guys. I want to go out to this space and make photos that you can use for your website, etc. So I think there's like, opportunities for direct action that definitely directly provoke change rather than just being about conversation. Also, shout out to Save USF Forest Reserve. Check them out on Insta if you're wanting to get involved.
I want to say like something really quickly to that too, and I hope I'm not ending as the bummer for this panel, but maybe I'll slide more seamlessly into that position than I might think. I have personally, this question comes up a lot in a lot of like artist panels and things like that, of what can art do, which isn't exactly what the question was, but what change can art make in the real world? And increasingly, as time goes on, I think I've become more cynical or realistic, and I really don't think art can change the world in that way. I think if you want to put food in people's mouths, you put food in people's mouths. I think that people need concrete solutions with material aid now. And I am of the belief that art does nothing in a very abstract way, that it doesn't have a utility, that it kind of elicits a state of suspension for the viewer, and then certain things maybe get worked out, but those things that are worked out are symbolic and kind of peripheral. They don't, like, I've never heard anyone leaving an art exhibit and say, oh, I was going to vote for Donald Trump and now I'm going to vote for Hillary Clinton. Or I've never heard anyone say that I'm now going to advocate for affordable housing after leaving this art exhibit. I just think art's power is somewhere else. And I think that I don't see the artist as having any particular responsibility or opportunity that citizens in a democratic society don't share. I think that's the bigger responsibility, is regardless of if you're an artist or not, what can you do to make a discrete change in the world?
I think we could have a whole other panel discussion on that question, and even jumping off of Jonathan's response. But I'm going to turn it over to Leslie. I know we're a little over time, but these are all wonderful responses. Go ahead, Leslie.
So first, I just want to thank all of the artists. I've gotten to talk with them a little bit during this semester, and they are so mindful, so professional, and the show is so extraordinary. So if you are watching and you can't get up to USF, please go online, have a look, and you can download all of the printables and look at them to see a little bit more about the artists. And I want to thank you all for being on the panel, and to Amanda for your mindful questions. I learned a lot today that I didn't know before, and I feel so fortunate. I'm in the gallery looking around as you're talking. We are out of time. We had an extraordinary amount of questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all, but hopefully you can visit the exhibition, go on a guided tour, and enjoy it. And I just want to wish you all a wonderful weekend, and wish all of you who are not staying in Tampa. It's a great loss for Tampa, but so much luck. You don't need luck, just so much goodness coming for you. And thank you to all the people who stayed with us for the 2 hours. We greatly appreciate you spending your evening with us. And a big round of applause. Thank you.
Congratulations all.
Thank you,
Congratulations.
Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Amanda.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Leslie and Amanda.
Good job.
Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night.
Good
Bye.
night.
So much.
See ya.